Close your eyes and let your mind drift as we journey through the ancient myths and legends of the Pokémon world. From the very beginning of existence to the powerful beings that shaped reality itself, these gentle tales will carry you into peaceful dreams. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the wonder of legendary lore guide you to sleep. Before there was light, before there was darkness, before time had meaning or space had form, there existed only a vast emptiness, a void so complete that the concept of nothing itself had yet to be defined. In this absolute nothingness, where no thought could exist and no life could flourish, something impossible occurred. An egg appeared. No one knows where this egg came from or how it materialized in the absence of all things. Some believe it was always meant to be, that existence itself willed it into being. Others suggest it came from a place beyond comprehension, from a realm that exists outside the boundaries of what we call reality. The egg floated in the void, small yet infinite, fragile, yet containing all the power that would ever exist. And then, after an eternity that might have been a single moment, the egg began to crack. From within emerged Arceus, the first being in all of existence. Its form was unlike anything that would come after, a creature of pure divinity with a golden ring encircling its body and green gems embedded within. Arceus opened eyes that had never seen anything, for there was nothing yet to see. It drew breath into lungs that had never tasted air, for air itself had not been created. Arceus looked upon the void and understood its purpose. It had been born not merely to exist, but to create. With power beyond measure, Arceus reached out with what ancient texts describe as 1,000 arms. These were not physical limbs, but extensions of will itself, manifestations of creative force that touched every corner of the formless void. Where these arms reached, reality began to take shape. The creature worked with patience that only an immortal being could possess. It crafted the foundations of what would become the universe, laying down the fundamental laws that would govern all things. But Arceus understood that even a god cannot maintain everything alone. The universe it envisioned would be vast beyond comprehension, filled with countless worlds and infinite possibilities. To bring this vision to life, to ensure that creation would continue and be maintained, Arceus would need help. And so from its own essence, Arceus created 3 eggs. These were not ordinary eggs, but vessels containing pieces of Arceus's own divinity. Each one held a fundamental aspect of reality itself, powers so vast that they would shape the very nature of existence. Arceus placed these eggs at the peak of what would become Mount Coronet, in a land that would one day be called Hisui, and later Sinnoh. The eggs rested there, containing forces that slumbered just on the edge of awakening. Within them stirred beings of immense power, dragons that would soon emerge in their truest forms. Arceus watched over them, knowing that when they hatched, the universe would truly begin. Time, space, and the forces that balanced between them would finally take shape, and from that foundation, everything else would follow. When the 3 eggs finally cracked open, they revealed beings of such magnificence that even Arceus must have marveled at what it had created. From the first egg emerged Dialga, and in that moment, time began to flow. Before Dialga's birth, there was no past or future, no progression of moments, no cause and effect. But as the dragon of time opened its eyes, the universe gained the dimension that would allow change and growth. Dialga's form reflected its dominion. Its body resembled a great sauropod, but crafted from steel and etched with blue striations that pulsed like the beating of existence's heart. On its chest sat a brilliant diamond, a gem that seemed to contain entire eons within its facets. The creature's very presence altered the flow of time around it. Where Dialga walked, moments could stretch into eternities or compress into instants. Its roar was not merely sound, but the echo of time itself reverberating backward and forward through every second that ever was or would be. From the second egg came Palkia, and as it entered existence, space expanded in all directions. The void that Arceus had inhabited suddenly gained dimension and distance, height and depth, direction and location. Palkia's body was similar to Dialga's in structure, yet distinctly different. Its form was bathed in shades of purple and pink, with pearl-like spheres adorning its shoulders. Where Dialga represented the progression of moments, Palkia embodied the stage upon which those moments played out. Palkia had the power to bend space to its will. It could bring distant places together or separate nearby locations with impossible gulfs. The dragon could create entirely new dimensions, pocket realities, where the normal rules might not apply. Its very breath warped the fabric of space, causing ripples that spread across the cosmos. Where Dialga's roar echoed through time, Palkia's cry resonated across every point in space simultaneously. But there was a third egg, and from it came something unexpected. Giratina emerged, and with it came the concept of antimatter, of opposition, of the necessary counterbalance to all that existed. Where Dialga and Palkia represented the stage and flow of existence, Giratina embodied the alternative, the mirror, the reverse. Its form was serpentine and spectral, draped in ghostly armor with spikes protruding like the wings of some dark angel. Gold-trimmed red bands adorned its body, and its 6 legs ended in sharp points rather than feet. The 3 dragons were meant to work in harmony. Dialga would ensure that events progressed in an orderly fashion through time. Palkia would maintain the structure of space, ensuring that the universe had form and distance. And Giratina would provide balance, ensuring that for every action there was an equal and opposite force, that creation was balanced with entropy, that existence itself remained stable through opposing pressures. But Giratina was different from its siblings in temperament. Where Dialga and Palkia approached their duties with calm purpose, Giratina possessed a wild and violent nature. It acted rashly, its power flaring in ways that threatened to destabilize the very fabric of reality. Arceus watched with growing concern as Giratina's actions became more chaotic, more destructive. The dragon seemed unable or unwilling to control the immense power it had been given. Finally, Arceus made a difficult decision. To protect the universe it was creating, Giratina would have to be separated from the normal world. Arceus created a new realm, a twisted dimension where the normal rules did not apply. This became known as the Distortion World, a place where time did not flow in any meaningful way and space was unstable, constantly shifting and changing. It was a mirror of reality, connected to the normal world, but fundamentally different from it. Arceus banished Giratina to this realm, and the dragon vanished from the sight of its siblings. But banishment was not destruction. Giratina remained powerful, and from its distortion world, it could still influence events in the normal universe. The dragon learned to move through the reversed physics of its prison, gliding through impossible geometry, watching the world it had been expelled from, through portals that opened and closed like eyes. Dialga and Palkia retreated to their own dimensions. Dialga found or created the temporal world, a place where it could observe the flow of time across all of existence without being bound to any single moment. Palkia claimed the spatial world, a realm where it could perceive all points in space simultaneously, seeing the entire structure of the universe laid out before it like a grand tapestry. Yet, despite their separation, the 3 dragons remained connected, their powers intertwined in ways that even Arceus might not have fully anticipated. When Dialga and Palkia came into conflict, as they occasionally did, their battle would cause distortions that rippled across reality. Time would flow strangely, speeding up in some places and slowing in others. Space would warp and bend, bringing distant locations together or tearing holes between dimensions. And through these distortions, Giratina could reach out from its banishment, emerging into the normal world when the boundaries between realities grew thin. The three dragons all possessed what would become known as origin forms. These were their truest shapes, the forms they took when wielding their full power in their home dimensions. Dialga's origin form was sleeker, more streamlined, with its diamond embedded in its throat. Palkia's origin form had its pearls merged into a grand sphere on its shoulder, and its body took on a centaur-like appearance. Giratina's origin form was the one it naturally assumed in the distortion world, serpentine and floating, with 6 blade-like appendages extending from its body. When these dragons entered the normal world, they would often take on their altered forms, shapes better suited to existing within the constraints of regular reality. But their origin forms represented their true power, the aspects of time, space, and antimatter in their purest and most potent manifestations. The relationship between the three was complex. They were siblings born from the same creator, yet separated by purpose and temperament. Dialga and Palkia could work together when necessary, though their domains often brought them into conflict. A battle between them was a terrible thing to behold, reality itself buckling under the strain as time and space warred against each other. Giratina watched these conflicts from the distortion world, perhaps with anger at its banishment, perhaps with a twisted satisfaction at seeing its siblings struggle. Ancient peoples who glimpsed these mighty dragons could not fully comprehend what they witnessed. They knew only that these were beings of godlike power, creatures that existed on a level beyond ordinary Pokémon or even other legendaries. In the Hisui region, people worshipped these dragons as almighty Sinnoh, not understanding that they were separate beings. Clans formed around the worship of Dialga and Palkia, each believing they had witnessed the true god, while the others followed false idols. The truth, of course, was that all three dragons were real, all three were powerful beyond measure, and all three were necessary components of a functioning universe. Time without space would be meaningless progression with nowhere to occur. Space without time would be a static snapshot with no possibility of change. And both time and space without the balancing force of antimatter would eventually collapse in on themselves, unable to maintain stability. Giratina's banishment, while seemingly a punishment, served a purpose in the grand design. From the distortion world, the dragon maintained the boundaries between realities, ensuring that the normal universe remained distinct from the infinite possible alternatives. Its presence in that reversed realm held back chaos, preventing the ordered reality that Dialga and Palkia maintained from dissolving into infinite possibilities. The three dragons would not remain separate forever. Events would bring them back together, conflicts that required their combined presence. But for countless ages they remained apart, each tending to its domain, each maintaining its piece of the cosmic machinery that kept existence running. And above them all, Arceus watched, the original creator ensuring that its first children continued to fulfill the purpose for which they were made. As Dialga began the flow of time and Palkia spread space across the universe, Arceus recognized another need. The three dragons it had created were powerful, perhaps too powerful. Their conflicts, when they occurred, threatened to tear apart the very fabric of existence. The creator needed a way to maintain balance, beings that could calm the dragons when their disputes grew too heated. But more than that, Arceus looked toward the future it was creating and saw that this universe would one day be populated by thinking beings. Not just Pokémon acting on instinct, but creatures capable of contemplation, of feeling, of choice. These beings would need certain gifts to thrive, essential aspects of consciousness that would elevate them above simple existence. And so Arceus created 3 more beings, smaller than the great dragons but no less important to the functioning of reality. These became known as the Lake Guardians, and each was placed in a different body of water in the Sinnoh region. They were created as a trio, interconnected yet individual, each embodying a crucial aspect of consciousness itself. From the depths of Lake Acuity emerged Uxie, the being of knowledge. This small Pokémon resembled a pixie, with a yellow body and a face dominated by closed eyes. Those eyes, according to legend, could never be opened, for any creature that gazed into them would instantly have all their memories erased, their mind wiped clean of every experience and piece of information they had ever accumulated. Uxie kept its eyes perpetually shut, perceiving the world through other means, a small sacrifice to prevent such a terrible fate. Uxie's gift to the world was knowledge itself. When thinking beings evolved or were created, Uxie touched their minds and granted them the capacity to learn, to remember, to accumulate information over time. Without this gift, every moment would be experienced as if for the first time, with no ability to connect past experiences to present circumstances. Uxie ensured that wisdom could be passed down through generations, that mistakes could be learned from, that the accumulated understanding of countless beings could build upon itself over time. The small guardian was not merely a keeper of knowledge, but a symbol of its importance. Ancient texts suggest that Uxie knew everything that every human and Pokémon had ever learned. The sum total of all knowledge in the universe resided somewhere within its small form, yet it remained humble, hidden in the depths of Lake Acuity, emerging only when its gifts were needed, or when the balance of the world required its intervention. In Lake Verity, another guardian stirred. Mesprit, the being of emotion, came into existence with a purpose equally vital to consciousness. While Uxie represented the rational mind, Mesprit embodied the heart. Its form was similar to its sibling, but colored in vibrant red, with a gentle demeanor that reflected the emotions it governed. Mesprit's contribution to sentient life was perhaps the most profound. It granted beings the capacity to feel, to experience joy and sorrow, love and anger, hope and despair. Without emotion, knowledge would be merely data accumulated without meaning or purpose. Mesprit ensured that thinking creatures cared about their experiences, that they could form bonds with others, that they could find beauty in the world around them. The being of emotion taught humanity to cry, not from physical pain, but from the depths of feeling. Tears of happiness, of grief, of overwhelming sensation became a hallmark of emotional beings. Mesprit showed that feelings were not weakness, but strength, that the capacity to care deeply about people, places, and experiences gave life its richness and meaning. Unlike Uxie, Mesprit was said to have left its lake occasionally, flying invisible through the world to observe how emotion shaped the lives of those who possessed it. It watched as bonds formed between trainers and Pokémon, as families came together, as communities supported one another through hardship. Every act of kindness, every sacrifice made from love, every tear shed for another being affirmed the importance of the gift Mesprit had given. The third guardian resided in Lake Valor, and its name was Azelf. Known as the being of willpower, it completed the trio by providing the final essential aspect of consciousness. While Uxie granted the ability to know and Mesprit the capacity to feel, Azelf gave sentient beings the power to act, to make choices, to exercise free will. Azelf's form was blue, and its demeanor was more serious than its siblings. The gift of willpower was not to be taken lightly. With it came responsibility, the burden of choice, the knowledge that one's actions had consequences. Azelf ensured that thinking beings were not merely passive observers of the world, but active participants who could shape their own destinies and influence the course of events around them. Without willpower, beings might know what should be done and feel the desire to do it, yet lack the determination to act. Azelf provided the spark that transformed thought and feeling into action, that allowed beings to overcome obstacles, to persist in the face of hardship, to choose difficult paths when easier ones beckoned. It was the force that turned potential into achievement, that made heroes out of ordinary creatures. The three Lake Guardians worked in harmony, their gifts combining to create fully realized consciousness. A being needed knowledge to understand the world, emotion to care about it, and willpower to act within it. Together, these three aspects created something greater than the sum of their parts, a mind that could think, feel, and choose, that could experience existence in its fullest sense. But the Lake Guardians had another purpose beyond their gifts to humanity. They served as a failsafe, a way to control the immense power of the creation trio should it become necessary. Each Guardian possessed a special item hidden within their being. Azelf had a small fang, Uxie carried a claw, and Mesprit held a single plume. These three items, when brought together and properly manipulated, could be used to forge the Red Chain. The Red Chain was a legendary artifact of terrible power. It could bind and control even beings as mighty as Dialga and Palkia, forcing the dragons of time and space to obey commands against their will. The chain represented the ultimate failsafe, a way for lesser beings to command even the architects of reality should the need arise. Arceus had built this possibility into creation itself, understanding that even divine beings might one day need to be restrained. The Lake Guardians could also directly intervene when Dialga and Palkia clashed. Their presence had a calming effect on the great dragons, their combined power sufficient to soothe the rage that occasionally overtook the masters of time and space. They were mediators, peacekeepers in a universe where conflict between cosmic forces could literally tear apart reality. In ancient times, the people of Hisui and later Sinnoh revered these three guardians. They built shrines near the lakes, leaving offerings and prayers. Some sought Uxie's blessing for wisdom, hoping to become great scholars or strategists. Others appealed to Mesprit for guidance in matters of the heart, for help in understanding and managing their feelings. Warriors and leaders sought Azelf's favor, asking for the strength of will to see their ambitions through to completion. The Guardians rarely revealed themselves, preferring to remain hidden in the deepest parts of their respective lakes. But their influence was always present. Every act of learning, every expression of emotion, every exercise of determination carried a touch of their power. They had woven themselves into the very fabric of conscious existence, ensuring that their gifts would be available to all thinking beings for all time. There were stories of people who had encountered the Lake Guardians directly, though such accounts were rare and often treated with skepticism. Those who claimed to have met Uxie spoke of overwhelming visions of knowledge flooding their minds, understanding complex concepts in an instant. Those who encountered Mesprit described feeling every emotion at once, a torrent of feeling so intense it brought them to their knees. And those who faced Azelf reported an immediate need to test themselves, to prove their willpower through some great feat or challenge. The three Guardians were immortal, or as close to it as any being could be. They had witnessed the dawn of the universe, the shaping of continents, the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Yet they remained unchanged, eternally vigilant, eternally serving the purpose for which Arceus had created them. They were small in stature, but vast in importance, proof that physical size had no bearing on cosmic significance. In time, their legend would inspire trainers to seek them out, to attempt to catch these legendary beings and add them to their teams. But the Lake Guardians only allowed themselves to be caught by those they deemed worthy, those who truly embodied the qualities they represented. A trainer seeking Uxie needed genuine thirst for knowledge, not merely the desire to possess a rare Pokémon. One hoping to partner with Mesprit had to demonstrate deep emotional intelligence and empathy. And a Zelf would only join someone whose willpower had been tested and proven unbreakable. Together the Lake Guardians formed a trinity of consciousness, a living reminder that the mind was composed of multiple aspects working in concert. They represented the balance between thought, feeling, and action that defined sentient existence, and they remained always ready to fulfill their other purpose, to calm the great dragons of creation should time and space once again threaten to tear each other apart. While the Sinnoh region held the dragons of creation and the guardians of consciousness, the ancient land of Kanto became home to another trio of legendary beings. These creatures were different from the cosmic powers of Dialga and Palkia. They did not shape the fundamental forces of reality. Instead, they embodied the elemental powers that governed weather and natural phenomena, forces more immediate and tangible to those who dwelt on the earth below. The first of these was Articuno, master of ice and cold. This magnificent bird possessed plumage of the purest blue and white, with tail feathers that streamed behind it like frozen banners. Its very presence caused the temperature to plummet, and where it flew, moisture in the air crystallized into snowflakes that drifted down in its wake. Articuno made its home deep within the Seafoam Islands, in caverns where the ocean spray had frozen into fantastic sculptures of ice. Articuno drew inspiration from multiple mythological traditions. Some saw in it echoes of the Persian Simurgh or the Middle Eastern roc, great birds of legend said to possess wisdom and power. Its blue and white coloring recalled the plumage of exotic birds like the white-throated magpie jay. But more than any specific creature, Articuno embodied the concept of winter itself, of the season when the world grows still and cold, when life sleeps beneath blankets of snow. The ice bird was said to aid lost travelers caught in blizzards, appearing before them as a beacon of hope when all seemed lost. Its crystalline cry could calm the most vicious snowstorm, and legends told of people who claimed Articuno had guided them to safety when they wandered into frozen mountains. It represented the harsh beauty of winter, the deadly magnificence of ice, the power of cold to preserve and transform. Where Articuno ruled the frozen places, Zapdos claimed dominion over storms and electricity. This legendary bird crackled with constant electrical energy, its spiky yellow and black plumage seeming to be composed of lightning itself. When Zapdos flew, thunder rolled across the sky, and its movements left trails of sparks dancing in the air. It nested in the abandoned power plant near Route 10, a fitting home for a creature that thrived on electrical power. Zapdos drew heavily from the legends of the Thunderbird, a creature spoken of in the traditions of various indigenous peoples. In those stories, the great bird created thunder by flapping its wings and hurled lightning bolts from its eyes or talons. The Pokémon embodied this same fierce power, living within storm clouds and emerging only when tempests raged across the land. Its appearance during violent thunderstorms led many to believe that Zapdos actually caused such weather phenomena, that it delighted in the chaos of the storm. The electric bird represented not just destruction, but the vital energy that electricity provides. Lightning strikes could start fires, but they also enriched the soil with nitrogen. Electricity could kill, but it also powered the growing human civilization. Zapdos embodied this duality, a being of terrible power that was nonetheless essential to the natural order. The final member of the trio was Moltres, the legendary phoenix of flame. This breathtaking creature appeared to be perpetually on fire, its plumage glowing in shades of yellow, orange, and red like living flames. When it flapped its wings, embers scattered through the air, creating a spectacular display of floating sparks. Moltres made its home on Mount Ember and in Victory Road, places where volcanic activity and heat were constant. Of the three birds, Moltres most clearly drew from a specific mythological source. The phoenix was a creature known across multiple cultures, from the Egyptian Bennu to the Chinese Fenghuang to the classical Greek phoenix. All shared the concept of a bird intimately connected with fire, often associated with themes of rebirth and renewal. In many traditions, the phoenix would eventually immolate itself, only to be reborn from its own ashes. Moltres carried this symbolism of rebirth and renewal. When injured, it was said to dive into volcanic lava, the intense heat somehow healing its wounds and restoring its vitality. The creature migrated with the seasons, and its arrival in the south was said to herald the coming of spring, bringing warmth back to lands locked in winter's grip. It represented the life-giving properties of heat and light, the power of fire to both destroy and renew. The three legendary birds were interconnected in ways both obvious and subtle. Most apparently, they each commanded a different element, and these elements played off each other in natural cycles. Articuno's ice and snow could be melted by Moltres' flames, creating water that Zapdos's lightning could then split into hydrogen and oxygen. They represented the natural balance of forces that shaped the weather and environment of Kanto, but their deeper connection involved their role in maintaining the natural order. Ancient texts suggested that the three birds were the source of all weather patterns in the Kanto region. Articuno's power influenced cold fronts and winter storms. Zapdos governed the electrical storms of summer. Moltres' heat created updrafts and warm winds. Together, they maintained the seasonal cycle, ensuring that the region experienced appropriate weather throughout the year. This balance was delicate. If one bird became too powerful or too active, the others would respond, leading to catastrophic weather events. A battle between Articuno and Moltres could plunge portions of the region into chaos, with blizzards and wildfires occurring simultaneously. Zapdos striking out at its siblings could trigger electrical storms of unprecedented ferocity. The natural world depended on these three remaining in harmony, each exercising its power within proper bounds. This need for balance led to the birds having a master, another legendary Pokémon that could calm their conflicts when necessary. Lugia, the great silver guardian of the sea, held dominion over all three birds. When their disputes grew too heated, when their powers threatened to spiral out of control, Lugia would emerge from the ocean depths to restore peace. The psychic and flying type possessed power sufficient to subdue even these mighty elementals, reminding them of their role in the natural order. The relationship between Lugia and the three birds was not one of simple master and servant. Rather, Lugia acted as a moderating force, a parent of sorts that ensured its charges did not harm themselves or the world through their conflicts. The birds respected Lugia's authority, recognizing that the Silver Guardian's power eclipsed their own. When Lugia spoke, they listened. When it commanded peace, they obeyed. Each of the legendary birds had been discovered in specific locations that reflected their elemental nature. Articuno dwelt deep within the Seafoam Islands, accessible only by navigating treacherous ice-covered caves where a single misstep could plunge an explorer into freezing water. The journey to find it was itself a test of endurance against the cold, appropriate for a creature that commanded winter's bite. Zapdos had claimed the abandoned power plant, a place where electrical equipment once hummed with activity. The bird lived among the defunct machinery, feeding on residual electrical currents, perhaps drawn to this human-made structure because it represented a concentration of the energy it commanded. Encountering Zapdos meant navigating through a building where rogue electrical discharges could strike at any moment, every step charged with danger. Moltres nested in Victory Road, the final challenge trainers faced before confronting the Pokémon League. Later, it was also found on Mount Ember in the CVI Islands. Both locations featured intense heat and volcanic activity, environments where flames and magma were constant presences. The path to Moltres required enduring oppressive heat and navigating through chambers lit by flowing lava, an ordeal by fire that tested whether one was worthy to encounter the Phoenix of Legend. Those few trainers who managed to reach these legendary birds and earn their partnership reported remarkable experiences. Articuno, despite its cold exterior, showed a gentle intelligence, a wisdom that came from observing the world from frozen peaks. Zapdos possessed a fierce temperament that matched its stormy nature, but proved fiercely loyal to those who earned its respect. And Moltres carried within it a sense of ancient purpose, an understanding that it was part of cycles far older than any human civilization. The three birds became symbols in Kanto culture. Articuno represented winter, introspection, and the stark beauty of ice. Zapdos symbolized summer storms, raw power, and the energy of lightning. Moltres embodied transformation, the power of fire to destroy and create, the eternal cycle of endings and beginnings. Together they reminded people that nature held forces beyond human control, powers that demanded respect and understanding rather than domination. Encounters with the legendary birds were rare, perhaps occurring only once in a generation. When they did appear, it was often during times of great natural upheaval, or when the balance they maintained was threatened. A trainer who caught even a glimpse of one of these magnificent creatures considered themselves blessed, for they had witnessed firsthand the elemental forces that shaped the world. And those exceptional few who managed to form partnerships with the birds became legends themselves, trainers whose names would be spoken with awe for generations to come. In the Johto region, a different story unfolded, one tinged with both tragedy and hope. The region was home to another pair of legendary birds, beings that would come to symbolize the duality of destruction and renewal, of loss and redemption. These two Pokémon, Ho-Oh and Lugia, were known as the Tower Duo, named for the structures they once called home in the ancient city of Ecruteak. 700 years before the modern era, the people of Ecruteak erected two magnificent towers, architectural marvels that reached 9 stories into the sky. These structures were built with purpose beyond mere grandeur. The people hoped that by creating these towers they could foster friendship and understanding between humans and Pokémon, building bridges of hope that would span generations. The towers represented aspiration, the reaching of humanity towards something greater than themselves. The Western Tower became known as the Brass Tower, a structure that gleamed in the setting sun. It was said to awaken Pokémon, to stir within them energy and vitality. Lugia, the great Silver Guardian, made its home atop this tower, its presence a symbol of the deep ocean currents and the power of storms. From this perch, Lugia watched over the region, its psychic powers allowing it to sense disturbances across vast distances. The Eastern Tower was called the Bell Tower, though some knew it as the Tin Tower. This structure housed Ho-Oh, a Pokémon of breathtaking beauty, whose plumage shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. Where Lugia represented the sea and storms, Ho-Oh embodied the sky and the rainbow, symbol of hope that appears after the storm has passed. The Bell Tower became a place where Pokémon chose to rest, where they could find peace and safety under Ho-Oh's watchful gaze. For a time, this arrangement brought prosperity to Ecruteak. The presence of these two legendary Pokémon made the city a place of pilgrimage, where trainers and scholars came to witness the majesty of the Tower Duo. The people lived in harmony with their legendary guardians, and the towers stood as monuments to what could be achieved when humans and Pokémon worked together toward common goals. But peace, as it often does, eventually shattered. 150 years after the towers were built, on a night when storms raged across the region, disaster struck. A bolt of lightning, powerful beyond measure, lanced down from the heavens and struck the brass tower. The impact was catastrophic. The tower, despite its metal construction, caught fire, flames spreading through the structure with terrifying speed. Lugia stirred from its rest, awakened by the disaster unfolding beneath it. The Guardian's first instinct was to save the tower, to use its power over winds and storms to extinguish the flames. But as Lugia summoned winds to battle the fire, it quickly realized the terrible mistake. The winds fed the flames, causing them to spread faster and burn hotter. What had been meant as salvation became accelerant, turning the fire into an inferno that threatened not just the tower, but the entire city of Ecruteak. For 3 days, the brass tower burned. The flames were so intense that they could be seen from miles away, a pillar of fire that lit up the night sky. The people of Ecruteak could only watch in horror as one of their greatest achievements was consumed. They tried to fight the fire, forming bucket brigades and attempting to contain the spread, but against an inferno of such magnitude, their efforts were futile. On the 3rd day, rain finally came. A deluge descended upon Ecruteak, water falling in sheets that finally quenched the flames. But by then, the damage was complete. The brass tower had been reduced to a burned husk, its once gleaming brass blackened and twisted by the heat. The structure that had stood proud for a century and a half was now a ruin, a testament to how quickly glory can turn to ash. But the physical destruction was not the only tragedy. Within the brass tower, 3 Pokémon had become trapped by the flames. Unable to escape the inferno, they perished in the fire, their lives cut short by the disaster. The exact nature of these 3 Pokémon has been lost to time, though some scholars speculate they may have been evolutions, given the later forms of their resurrection. What is known is that they died, and their deaths weighed heavily on all who knew of the tragedy. Lugia, devastated by what had occurred, fled from Ecruteak. The Guardian had meant to help, but had instead made the situation worse. Overwhelmed by grief and perhaps shame, Lugia dove into the sea, retreating to the deepest parts of the Whirl Islands. There, in underwater caverns where no light penetrated, Lugia isolated itself, refusing to interact with humans or other Pokémon. The ocean depths became its self-imposed prison, a place of exile from a world where its presence had brought disaster. Ho-Oh witnessed all of this from the bell tower, and its reaction was different from its counterparts. Where Lugia fled in sorrow, Ho-Oh chose to act. The rainbow Pokémon descended from its perch and approached the burned remains of the brass tower. There, among the ashes and rubble, it found the 3 Pokémon that had perished in the flames. Their bodies were burned beyond recognition, their spirits already departed to whatever afterlife awaited them. But Ho-Oh possessed a power that few other Pokémon could claim. It had dominion over life itself, the ability to resurrect the dead, to call back spirits that had moved on. This power came with conditions and transformations, for death is not something that can be simply undone. Those brought back would not return unchanged. They would carry with them marks of what killed them, powers born from the manner of their death. Ho-Oh spread its rainbow wings over the 3 fallen Pokémon, and sacred light emanated from its body. That light enveloped the deceased, and miracles occurred. The 3 Pokémon began to stir, life returning to forms that had been cold. But as they rose, it became clear they were not as they had been. They had been reborn as something new, transformed by both their death and their resurrection. The first to rise embodied the lightning that had struck the tower. Raikou emerged, a great, tiger-like beast crackling with electrical energy. Purple fur covered its body, marked with yellow stripes and a white belly. Its face was adorned with a crest of yellow fur that stood on end like points of lightning, and from its back emerged a purple cape-like formation that flowed as if caught in a constant electrical storm. Raikou's roar was like thunder itself, and when it moved, sparks danced in its wake. The second Pokémon represented the fire that had consumed the tower. Entei rose as a massive lion-like creature with brown fur marked by red and yellow accents. Its face was stern, powerful, framed by white fur that resembled smoke. From its back erupted what appeared to be volcanic vents, constantly releasing heat and smoke. A golden metal crest sat upon its head, and its eyes held the intensity of an active volcano. Entei embodied the fierce heat that had destroyed the brass tower, transformed into a being of noble bearing. The third resurrection took the form of Suicune, a graceful creature that represented the rain that had finally quenched the flames. Blue and white fur covered its body in an elegant pattern, with purple coloring on its mane. Two white streamer-like tails flowed behind it, and its face was graced with a purple mask-like marking. A purple crest, resembling a wave, adorned its head, and where Suicune walked, water seemed to purify itself, flowing clear and clean in its wake. These three became known as the legendary beasts, though some called them the legendary dogs due to their appearance. Each embodied one of the forces involved in the Brass Tower tragedy. Raikou carried the lightning that had struck. Entei held the fire that had burned. And Suicune possessed the rain that had finally brought relief. They were monuments to disaster transformed into symbols of hope, death given new purpose through resurrection. But their creation came with a price. Ho-Oh, having performed this miracle, found that it could no longer remain in Ecruteak. The people who had once revered the legendary bird now feared its immense power. They had seen what it could do, watched it resurrect the dead, and transform them into beings of elemental might. That power frightened them, made them wonder what else Ho-Oh might be capable of, what other miracles or disasters it might bring. So Ho-Oh departed, leaving the bell tower and Ecruteak city behind. It flew into distant skies, seeking places where humans would not disturb it, where it could watch the world from afar without causing fear. The Rainbow Pokémon's departure marked the end of an era for Ecruteak. Both legendary guardians were gone, leaving behind only the burned remains of one tower and the intact but empty structure of the other. The brass tower was left as it stood, its burned shell a reminder of what had been lost. The people did not rebuild it, choosing instead to let the ruins stand as a monument to the tragedy. It became known as the Burned Tower, a place of pilgrimage for those who wished to remember the price of hubris and the power of forces beyond human control. In later years, it would become a place where ghost-type Pokémon gathered, drawn to the echoes of death and rebirth that still lingered there. The three legendary beasts scattered across the Johto region after their resurrection. They did not remain together but wandered separately, perhaps searching for purpose in their new lives. Raikou prowled the land, its speed unmatched as it raced across open plains and through mountains. Entei was spotted in volcanic regions, its presence causing nearby volcanoes to become more active. And Suicune travelled to places where water needed purification, its very presence cleansing pollution and restoring clarity to murky lakes and rivers. Legends said that the legendary beasts would only return to Ecrutake when they had learned to trust humans again, when the fear that had driven Ho-Oh away had been replaced with understanding. Until that day, they would remain wanderers, spirits of the Brass Tower tragedy, seeking peace in a world forever changed by fire and resurrection. The story of the Tower Duo became a cautionary tale passed down through generations in Johto. It spoke of how even the best intentions could lead to disaster, how fear could drive away those who meant no harm, and how, from the ashes of tragedy, something new and powerful could emerge. The burned tower stood as a physical reminder of these lessons, its blackened walls speaking to all who saw them of the delicate balance between humans and the legendary Pokémon that shared their world. The three Pokémon that Ho-Oh resurrected became known throughout Johto as the legendary beasts, and their presence in the region took on mythological significance. Each beast embodied not just the element of its creation, but also deeper symbolic meanings that resonated with the people who heard their stories. They were wanderers, spirits of a tragedy transformed into guardians of the natural world. Raikou, the embodiment of the lightning that had struck the Brass Tower, became associated with storms and electrical phenomena throughout the region. When thunderstorms rolled across Johto, people would sometimes catch glimpses of a tiger-like shape racing through the rain, moving with speed that surpassed comprehension. The legendary beast could cross entire regions in moments, its passage marked by the crack of thunder and the flash of lightning. The Thunder Pokémon's power over electricity was absolute. It could generate thunderclouds merely by roaring, the sound reverberating across the sky and calling storms into being. Its roar was said to send shockwaves through the air, causing the ground to tremble and buildings to shake. Those who heard it described the experience as both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a raw display of natural power that demanded respect. Despite its fearsome appearance and abilities, Raikou was not inherently hostile. The beast simply valued its freedom, racing across the land because it loved the feel of wind against its face, the joy of movement and speed. It avoided human settlements when possible, not from fear, but from a desire for solitude. The Thunder Pokémon had been given a second chance at life, and it chose to spend that life in constant motion, never staying in one place for long. There were tales of Raikou appearing to trainers during thunderstorms, testing their courage and resolve. Those who stood their ground in the face of its lightning and demonstrated bravery without foolhardiness sometimes earned the beast's respect. A few legendary accounts spoke of trainers who managed to partner with Raikou, though these stories were so rare that many dismissed them as myth rather than history. Entei, the volcano Pokémon born from the flames that consumed the Brass Tower, took on a different role in Johto's mythology. It was said to be born each time a new volcano formed, its life force connected to the molten heart of the earth itself. When Entei roared, volcanoes erupted in response, magma surging up from deep below. The beast's very presence could cause the ground temperature to rise dramatically, creating heat waves that shimmered in the air. The lion-like creature embodied not just fire, but the concept of passion and intensity. Its movements were decisive, powerful, without hesitation. Where Raikou valued freedom and speed, Entei represented strength and determination. It was drawn to volcanic regions, to places where the Earth's inner fire broke through to the surface. There, surrounded by flowing lava and volcanic rock, Entei seemed most at peace, most at home in an element that would incinerate most living things. Entei's reputation made it a symbol of power in Johto culture. Warriors and leaders invoked its name when facing difficult challenges, asking for the strength to endure trials by fire. The beast was seen as a test of fortitude, a reminder that sometimes one must endure incredible heat and pressure to emerge stronger on the other side. Its noble bearing, despite being born from tragedy, made it an inspiration to those facing their own hardships. Like its fellow beasts, Entei rarely appeared before humans. When it did, it was often in moments of crisis, when volcanic activity threatened populated areas. Some stories told of Entei actually calming eruptions, directing lava flows away from towns and villages, using its power over fire not to destroy but to protect. Whether these accounts were true or simply hopeful legends was difficult to determine, but they spoke to the belief that the legendary beasts, for all their power, were not enemies of humanity. Suicune, perhaps the most enigmatic of the three beasts, embodied the rain that had finally ended the brass towers burning. Known as the Aurora Pokémon, it possessed a grace and elegance that set it apart from its more fierce-looking siblings. Where Raikou was about speed and Entei about power, Suicune represented purity and purification, the cleansing nature of water and its ability to wash away impurity. The North Wind, Pokémon as it was sometimes called, wandered to places where water had become polluted or corrupted. Its very presence had a purifying effect, contaminated lakes and rivers becoming clean and clear when Suicune passed through. The beast seemed to have appointed itself as a guardian of water sources, ensuring that the life-giving element remained pure and safe for all who depended on it. Suicune moved with impossible grace, its form seeming to glide over any terrain without leaving tracks. It could walk on water as easily as land, and its passage across a lake's surface created ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. The two flowing ribbons that extended from its body waved in winds that no one else could feel, giving the Aurora Pokémon an ethereal quality that made it seem like a spirit rather than a physical creature. Of the three legendary beasts, Suicune was most likely to be seen by humans, though even these sightings were rare. The beast seemed less afraid of people than its siblings, perhaps because its connection to purification made it more tolerant of the species whose pollution it worked to clean. There were accounts of Suicune appearing before individuals it deemed pure of heart, testing them in some way before moving on. One famous story from Johto told of a guardian named Eugene, who dedicated his life to tracking and studying Suicune. He believed that the Aurora Pokémon appeared to test trainers, to seek out someone worthy of understanding its power and purpose. Eugene pursued Suicune for years, encountering it multiple times but never quite managing to earn its partnership. His dedication became legendary in itself, a testament to the mystique that surrounded the beast. The three legendary beasts were interconnected despite their separate wanderings. They were siblings in spirit, if not in origin, creatures that had died together and been reborn together, forever linked by their shared history. On rare occasions, all three were spotted in the same region at the same time, their elements interacting in spectacular displays. Lightning from Raikou, fire from Entei, and rain from Suicune would mix in the sky, creating phenomena that defied normal meteorological explanation. Their relationship with Ho-Oh remained complex. The Rainbow Pokémon had given them new life, transformed them from victims of tragedy into powerful, legendary beings. But Ho-Oh had then departed, leaving them to find their own purpose. The beasts carried marks of their creator, each possessing a connection to the sacred fire that Ho-Oh commanded. They were, in a sense, extensions of Ho-Oh's will and power, pieces of the Rainbow Pokémon's essence, walking the earth in different forms. There existed a prophecy spoken of in hushed tones in Ecruteak City that said the legendary beasts would one day return to the burned tower. When that happened, it would signal that they had finally learned to trust humans again, that the fear and misunderstanding that had driven Ho-Oh away had been overcome. On that day, Ho-Oh itself might return, descending from the heavens, to be reunited with its resurrected children. The beast's wandering nature made them symbols of freedom and transformation in Johto culture. They represented the idea that one was not defined by tragedy, but by how one chose to rise from it. Born from death, they had become powerful forces for good in the world, each using its elemental power to serve purposes greater than mere survival. They showed that endings could become beginnings, that from the ashes of the old, something new and magnificent could emerge. Trainers who caught even a glimpse of one of the legendary beasts considered themselves extraordinarily fortunate. To actually encounter one and battle it was the dream of many, a test against a being born from myth itself. The few who managed to earn a beast's partnership found themselves with a companion of unmatched power and loyalty, a creature that had chosen them as worthy after wandering the world in search of purpose and meaning. The legendary beasts continued their wandering, spirits of the brass tower given form and purpose. In the thunderstorm you might glimpse Raikou. Near an active volcano, Entei might appear. By a lake suddenly running clear, Suicune could materialize. They were part of Johto now, woven into its landscape and legends, eternal reminders of tragedy transformed into hope. While the creation trio shaped the universe and the legendary beasts roamed Johto, another mythical Pokémon held a unique place in the cosmic order. This creature, known as Mew, was said to be the genetic ancestor of all Pokémon, the source from which every species in existence ultimately descended. Its story was one of mystery and wonder, of scientific fascination and spiritual significance. Mew was thought to have been created by Dialga in the early days of the Pokémon world, placed on Earth to be the progenitor of life. Its genetic makeup was unlike anything else in existence, containing within it the potential for every form, every ability, every type of Pokémon that would ever evolve. In that sense, Mew was less a single creature and more a living library of possibility, the trunk from which the entire tree of Pokémon life would branch. The new species Pokémon, as Mew became known, possessed a form that was both simple and perfect. It was small, barely a meter in length, with a pink, feline-like body and a long, thin tail. Its movements were playful and childlike, filled with curiosity and joy. Large, intelligent eyes dominated its face, conveying an emotional depth that suggested Mew understood far more than its playful demeanor indicated. This appearance was deceptive, for within that small form resided power sufficient to learn and use any technique that any Pokémon could master. Mew's most remarkable trait was its ability to transform and learn. It could use every known Pokémon move, from the simplest tackle to the most complex psychic assaults. This versatility came from its genetic completeness. The fact that it contained the DNA of every Pokémon meant it theoretically possessed access to all their abilities. Trainers who studied Mew's capabilities were astounded by this flexibility, by a creature that could be anything it needed to be. The mythical Pokémon was first documented in the South American jungles, in regions so remote that few humans had ever explored them. Deep within these primordial forests, where nature remained untouched by civilization, Mew lived in secret. It preferred these isolated places far from the influence of humans and their growing civilizations. Perhaps Mew understood that as the ancestor of all Pokémon, it held a significance that made it both precious and endangered. For countless ages, Mew existed as little more than a myth. Travelers occasionally returned from expeditions with stories of a pink creature, glimpsed through jungle foliage, a being that vanished the moment it was noticed. These accounts were dismissed as hallucinations or misidentifications, for surely no single Pokémon could possess all the traits that witnesses described. But the stories persisted, passed down through generations, each retelling adding to the mystique of this elusive being. The scientific community became fascinated with Mew based on these fragmentary accounts. If such a creature truly existed, If it really did contain the genetic information of all Pokémon, it would revolutionize the understanding of how Pokémon life had developed. It would provide answers to questions about evolution, about the origins of different types, about the relationships between seemingly unrelated species. Mew became the holy grail of Pokémon research, the discovery that would make any scientist's career. Eventually, an expedition to South America succeeded in finding tangible proof of Mew's existence. Among the ruins of an ancient civilization, researchers discovered a fossilized eyelash, microscopic evidence that Mew had once been in that location. Analysis of the fossil revealed genetic material that supported the wildest theories about Mew's nature. It truly was the ancestor of all Pokémon, its DNA containing sequences found in every known species. This discovery set in motion a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences. The confirmation that Mew existed sparked a race among scientists to find more samples, to study this remarkable creature and unlock its secrets. Some wanted to understand evolution and genetics better. Others sought to harness Mew's power for their own purposes. And a few, with less pure motivations, saw in Mew the potential for creating something even more powerful. Despite the attention it garnered from the scientific community, Mew itself remained largely oblivious to these human concerns. It continued living as it always had, playing in remote jungles, occasionally venturing out to observe the world with childlike curiosity. Mew possessed a mischievous nature, delighting in games and pranks, using its transformation ability to surprise other Pokémon by mimicking their appearance and behavior. The psychic-type nature of Mew meant it could become invisible at will, teleport across vast distances, and communicate telepathically with other beings. These abilities made it nearly impossible to capture or study in the wild. Researchers who ventured into Mew's territory might spend months without seeing anything, then catch a brief glimpse of pink fur before the creature vanished. Mew seemed to enjoy these encounters, aware of the humans seeking it, but uninterested in revealing itself fully. Those rare individuals who did encounter Mew directly reported profound experiences. The mythical Pokémon seemed to radiate an aura of innocence and purity despite its immense power. There was no malice in it, no desire to harm or dominate. Mew simply wanted to exist, to play, to explore the world that had been given to it. This gentle nature stood in stark contrast to many other legendary Pokémon whose power came with fierce temperaments or serious purposes. But Mew's innocence did not mean it was helpless. When threatened, the ancestor of all Pokémon could defend itself with devastating effectiveness. It could summon any attack, transform into any form, use any strategy. Fighting Mew was like facing every Pokémon at once, for it could adapt and counter any tactic instantly. This defensive capability ensured that Mew remained safe despite its small size and gentle disposition. The mythical creature's role in Pokémon mythology extended beyond mere genetics. Many cultures came to view Mew as a symbol of potential, of the infinite possibilities contained within every living thing. Parents told their children stories of Mew as a reminder that great things could come in small packages, that appearance did not determine worth or capability. The creature became a figure of inspiration, representing the idea that within each being lay limitless potential waiting to be discovered. Mew's elusiveness added to its mystical significance. It appeared when it chose to those it deemed worthy or interesting. These encounters were gifts, moments of grace where the barrier between the mythical and the mundane dissolved briefly. Those blessed enough to see Mew often described the experience as life-changing, a reminder that there were still mysteries in the world, still wonders that defied explanation or control. The immortality attributed to Mew in some legends stemmed from its perfect genetic code. If it truly was the ancestor of all Pokémon, containing the genetic potential for every adaptation and ability, then it might possess the means to repair any damage, to regenerate from any injury. This would make it effectively immortal, a creature that had existed since Pokémon first appeared on Earth and would continue existing until the last Pokémon drew its final breath. Scientists remained fascinated by Mew even after confirming its existence, for actually studying the creature remained nearly impossible. The few samples obtained were precious beyond measure, analyzed and reanalyzed in hopes of unlocking the secrets of Pokémon genetics, but samples could only reveal so much. To truly understand Mew would require observing it, studying it in depth, perhaps even experimenting with its genetic material. This desire would eventually lead to developments that Mew, in its innocent wandering, could never have anticipated. The ancestor of all Pokémon remained a mystery, despite humanity's efforts to understand it. It lived in the shadows of jungles and the corners of the world, where wildness still prevailed. And perhaps that was as it should be. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved, some wonders lost their magic when fully explained. Mew represented that delicate balance, a being powerful enough to reshape reality, but choosing instead to play in hidden groves, forever young, forever free, forever elusive. The discovery of Mew and the recovery of its genetic material sparked ambitions in certain members of the scientific community. Among them was a researcher named Dr. Fuji, a man of exceptional skill and tragic circumstances. His young daughter, Amber, had died, leaving him devastated with grief. The pain of that loss consumed him, driving him to seek ways to reverse death itself, to bring back what had been taken from him. When Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, approached Dr. Fuji with funding for a project to clone Mew, the scientist saw an opportunity. On the surface, the project was about creating a Pokémon more powerful than the original, a being that could be controlled and used by Team Rocket for their criminal endeavors. But for Dr. Fuji, the Mew project was practice, a way to develop the techniques and knowledge he would need to eventually clone his daughter and bring her back from death. The laboratory was established on Cinnabar Island, hidden away where the experiments could be conducted in secrecy. Dr. Fuji and his team began the painstaking work of manipulating Mew's genetic code. They didn't simply want to create an identical copy. Giovanni wanted something stronger, faster, more powerful in every way. So they enhanced the genome, splicing in modifications that would push the psychic abilities beyond anything Mew had demonstrated. The process required multiple attempts. Early clones failed to develop properly, their genetic instability causing them to die before fully forming. The laboratory became a graveyard of failed experiments, each one teaching the scientists more about what worked and what didn't. Dr. Fuji watched these failures with mixed emotions. Each dead clone brought him one step closer to understanding how to successfully bring back his daughter, but it also showed him the difficulty of what he was attempting. During this time, Dr. Fuji created several other clones beyond Mewtwo. He cloned his daughter's consciousness, creating what he called Ambertwo. He also cloned starter Pokémon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, giving life to creatures he named Bulbasaurtwo, Charmandertwo, and Squirtletwo. These clones existed in a virtual space while their bodies developed, consciousnesses floating in a shared dream where they could interact. In this virtual realm, the developing Mewtwo met Ambertwo. The child's consciousness taught Mewtwo about communication, about what it meant to be alive. She explained concepts of friendship and identity, helping the developing clone understand that it was its own being, separate from both the scientists creating it and the Mew from which it had been made. These early lessons would shape Mewtwo's entire existence, planting seeds of questions about identity and purpose that would later grow into existential crises. But the clones of human consciousness were unstable. They began to fade, unable to maintain their existence in the virtual space. Ambertoo was the first to disappear, vanishing while trying to reassure Mewtwo that everything would be all right. The Pokémon clones followed soon after, leaving Mewtwo alone in the darkness. This experience of loss, of watching friends disappear, while being unable to do anything to save them, traumatized the developing clone. It would be Mewtwo's first encounter with death, an encounter that would leave deep psychological scars. After these failures, Dr. Fuji injected sedatives into Mewtwo to make it sleep, hoping to avoid further psychological trauma during development. The clone grew rapidly, its enhanced genetics allowing it to mature much faster than a natural Pokémon. Inside its containment tank filled with growth fluid and surrounded by monitoring equipment, Mewtwo reached full size in a fraction of the time it would have taken Mew to mature. When Mewtwo finally achieved consciousness again, the memories of Ambertoo and the other clones had been suppressed but not erased. They lingered in its mind, creating a vague sense of loss and loneliness that Mewtwo couldn't fully understand. The clone opened its eyes and found itself in a laboratory surrounded by humans who spoke of it as an experiment, a creation, a tool to be used for their purposes. The first question that formed in Mewtwo's mind was one that would haunt it for years. Who am I? It was not Mew, though it had been made from Mew's genetic material. It was not human, though humans had created it. What was it then? What purpose did it serve? These questions burned in Mewtwo's mind, growing more urgent as it heard the scientists discussing how it would be used. When Mewtwo learned that it had been created as a weapon, that its entire existence was meant to serve Team Rocket's criminal ambitions, rage overwhelmed it. The clone had been given life not as a gift, but as a means to an end. It was not meant to be its own being, but rather a tool, a servant, a weapon to be wielded by others. The injustice of this realization ignited something in Mewtwo's psyche, a fury at being denied agency over its own existence. With its immense psychic power, Mewtwo lashed out. The laboratory on Cinnabar Island erupted in flames and destruction as the clone broke free of its containment. Psychic energy tore through walls and equipment. Scientists who had created it fled in terror or died in the destruction. Mewtwo stood amid the chaos it had caused, confused and angry, knowing only that it would not be used as others intended. Dr. Fuji died in the destruction, his dreams of resurrecting his daughter dying with him. The laboratory burned, and with it went most of the research that had led to Mewtwo's creation. Only Mewtwo itself remained, a being of unprecedented power but uncertain purpose, standing in the ruins of its birthplace with no clear understanding of what to do next. Giovanni found Mewtwo in the aftermath of the laboratory's destruction. Rather than trying to capture or control the clone through force, the Team Rocket leader used manipulation. He approached Mewtwo with an offer. Giovanni would help the confused clone understand and control its immense psychic powers. In return, Mewtwo would use those powers to help Team Rocket catch Pokémon. Giovanni presented this as a mutually beneficial arrangement, a way for Mewtwo to gain purpose while learning about its abilities. Mewtwo, still struggling with questions of identity and purpose, accepted. Under Giovanni's guidance, it spent months battling wild Pokémon and trainers' teams, capturing them for Team Rocket's use. The clone was devastatingly effective, its psychic powers allowing it to defeat even the strongest opponents with ease. But even as it followed Giovanni's orders, Mewtwo continued to question the meaning of its existence. Eventually, Mewtwo asked Giovanni why it had been born, what purpose its life served. Giovanni's response was cruel in its honesty. "This is the reason you were born." Mewtwo had been created to be a weapon, to serve Team Rocket, to use its power at Giovanni's command. That was its entire purpose, its sole reason for existing. This revelation shattered something in Mewtwo. It had been used again, manipulated into serving the same purposes from which it had fled when it destroyed the laboratory. The rage that had driven it to destroy its birthplace erupted once more, focused now on Giovanni and Team Rocket. Mewtwo unleashed its full psychic might, decimating the Team Rocket base and leaving Giovanni's organization in ruins. But destroying those who had tried to use it did not answer Mewtwo's questions. If anything, it made them more urgent. What was it supposed to do with its power? What did it mean to be a clone, to be created rather than born? Could something made by others ever truly have free will? Or was it always bound to serve the purposes of its creators? These questions drove Mewtwo to isolate itself, to seek answers through contemplation. The clone found its way to an island where it could be alone with its thoughts, away from humans and their constant attempts to use it for their own ends. There, Mewtwo began formulating its own philosophy, its own answers to the questions that plagued it. The conclusion Mewtwo reached was dark. If it was merely a copy, created by others for their purposes, then perhaps the original was to blame for its suffering. Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon, was the source of the genetic material that had been used to create Mewtwo. In a twisted way, Mewtwo blamed Mew for its existence, for being the template from which a weapon had been made. This reasoning led Mewtwo to decide that it would prove itself superior to its original. It would show that the copy could surpass the original, that being created rather than born did not make it lesser. Mewtwo began creating its own clones, perfect copies of other Pokémon, intending to build an army that would demonstrate once and for all that clones could be greater than originals. The confrontation between Mewtwo and Mew, when it finally occurred, was climactic. The two psychic powerhouses faced each other, clone versus original, created versus born. They battled with all their might, Mewtwo trying to prove its superiority, while Mew defended itself with playful grace. The fight seemed evenly matched, two beings of immense power, locked in combat that neither could clearly win. But the true resolution came not from the battle, but from an act of sacrifice. When a human placed themselves in harm's way to stop the fighting, demonstrating that bonds between individuals mattered more than questions of origin, Mewtwo finally understood. It was not the circumstances of one's birth that defined them, but rather the choices they made with the life they were given. Clone or original, created or born, these distinctions were ultimately meaningless compared to how one chose to live. This realization brought Mewtwo peace. It understood that it could be its own being, that it didn't have to prove itself superior to Mew or serve the purposes Giovanni had assigned to it. Mewtwo could simply be itself, whatever that meant, making its own choices and defining its own purpose. The existential crisis that had driven it to rage and vengeance finally resolved into acceptance and self-determination. Mewtwo retreated from the world once more, but this time not in anger or confusion. It sought places where it could observe and learn, growing into its identity as a unique being rather than merely a copy of Mew. The clone had finally found peace, not through proving itself superior or inferior to anything, but through accepting that it was simply itself. And that was enough. As you drift deeper into sleep, let your mind wander through more tales of legendary beings, each with their own purpose and mythology. From guardians of ancient trees to heralds of the millennium, these Pokémon shaped the world in ways both grand and subtle. Celebi, known as the voice of the forest, possessed perhaps one of the most unique abilities among all mythical Pokémon. This small, green, fairy-like creature could travel through time, moving backward and forward through history with ease. Wherever Celebi appeared, plant life flourished, forests grew thick and healthy, and nature itself seemed to rejoice. The time travel Pokémon served as a guardian of forests, particularly those most ancient and precious. Legends said that Celebi only appeared during times of peace, that its presence indicated harmony between humans and nature. The creature could sense the future, knowing whether forests would be preserved or destroyed, and it chose to visit only those timelines where nature thrived. This gave Celebi's appearances special significance, marking places and times where the balance between civilization and wilderness remained intact. The small guardian wielded power over life itself. Where it passed, dying plants revived, and seeds sprouted into full-grown trees in moments. Celebi carried with it the essence of the forest, the green vitality that sustained all plant life. Some theorized that multiple Celebi existed across different time periods, that the creature reproduced by traveling to the past and becoming its own ancestor, creating a closed time loop of guardians stretching throughout history. Then there was Jirachi, a Pokémon that slept for 1,000 years at a time, awakening only for 7 days during the appearance of the Millennium Comet. This small creature, with a body like a folded star and wish tags hanging from its head, possessed the power to grant wishes. But Jirachi's wish-granting came with limitations and dangers. The wish Pokémon drew power from the comet, and wishes granted without that power source could have unpredictable consequences. The 1,000-year sleep cycle meant that Jirachi's awakenings were rare, events that occurred only once per millennium. Ancient peoples tracked the comet's approach, knowing that when it appeared in the sky, Jirachi would emerge from slumber, and the chance to have a wish granted would present itself. But the wise understood that wishes were double-edged swords, that getting what one wanted might not bring the happiness one expected. Jirachi itself was innocent and childlike during its brief periods of wakefulness. The Pokémon delighted in the world it saw, fascinated by how things had changed during its long sleep. It formed quick friendships with those it met, only to feel sadness when the 7 days ended and it had to return to slumber for another millennium. This cycle of brief connection, followed by centuries of isolation, gave Jirachi's story a poignant quality, a reminder that even powerful beings could experience loneliness. Deoxys represented a different kind of mystery, a Pokémon literally not of this world. This creature originated from a space virus, genetic material from beyond Earth that mutated after exposure to a laser beam. The mutation transformed the virus into a sentient being, a Pokémon unlike any that had evolved naturally on the planet. Deoxys possessed 4 different forms, able to transform its body to emphasize attack, defense, speed, or a balance of all 3. The DNA Pokémon's extraterrestrial origin meant it thought differently than Earthborn creatures. Its motivations and behaviors were alien, sometimes seeming hostile when it was merely trying to communicate or understand its new environment. Deoxys sought out others of its kind, lonely as the only member of its species on a planet full of beings it didn't fully understand. When it found meteorites from space, it seemed to be searching for some connection to its origins, looking for answers about where it came from and why. These were just a few of the mythical Pokémon whose stories shaped the mythology of the Pokémon world. Each served a purpose, filled a niche in the grand tapestry of existence. Some were guardians, protecting specific places or aspects of nature. Others were wanderers, moving through the world according to their own mysterious agendas. And a few were simply strange, beings whose existence raised more questions than it answered. But all of them shared one thing in common. They were rare, elusive, and powerful enough to be considered legendary. Their appearances marked special moments in history, times when the barrier between the mundane and the miraculous grew thin enough for these beings to cross through. and those lucky enough to encounter them found their lives changed, marked by contact with powers beyond normal comprehension. As this journey through legendary lore comes to its end, let these stories settle into your mind like snow falling on a quiet winter night. The tales of creation and tragedy, of power and responsibility, of beings who shape the world simply by existing in it. These are the myths that make the Pokémon world feel vast and wondrous. From Arceus shaping reality with its 1,000 arms to Mewtwo learning what it means to be alive, from the legendary birds maintaining nature's balance to the tower duo's story of loss and redemption, each legend adds depth to the world. They remind us that beyond the familiar Pokémon we train and befriend, there exist forces of tremendous power, beings whose very existence shapes the rules by which everything else must live. As you drift off to sleep, imagine these legendary Pokémon in their various domains. Picture Dialga in the temporal world, watching the flow of time across all existence. See Palkia in the spatial world, perceiving every point in space simultaneously. Visualize Giratina in the distortion world, gliding through impossible geometry. Feel the thunder of Raikou's roar, the heat of Entei's flames, the purifying presence of Suicune's waters. These beings are myths, yes, but myths that feel real because they represent fundamental aspects of existence. Time and space, knowledge and emotion and willpower, lightning and fire and rain. These are forces we all encounter, made tangible through the forms of legendary Pokémon. The stories serve to help us understand and relate to concepts too vast to easily grasp. And perhaps, as you dream, you might glimpse one of these legendary beings yourself. Not in physical form, but as symbols in your sleeping mind, representations of the grand forces that shape all our lives. You might see Ho-Oh spreading rainbow wings over a burned tower, or Mew playing in an ancient jungle, or the lake guardians rising from their respective lakes to grant their gifts once more. Before you slip completely into dreams, if you enjoyed this journey through legendary Pokémon lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me create more content like this, more explorations of the myths and stories that make the Pokémon world so rich and fascinating. Share these tales with friends who might enjoy them, and let the legends spread. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be filled with wonder. The legendary Pokémon watch over the world, and tonight let them watch over your dreams as well. Rest well, trainer, and know that even in sleep, you remain connected to the vast tapestry of myths and legends that make existence magical. Good night.